Hi everyone, Happy New Year. It's the Frugal Gardener here again. We're going to have a look today at, there's not a lot to do outside at the moment, especially in my garden, which is so wet. It's best to keep off the lawns. But what I wanted to show you this morning, I've got some seeds that I want to propagate. And this particular plant, I don't know if you can recognise it from that, it's evergreen. It's a sarcococca, and sarcococca are excellent for scent at this time of the year. They're just starting to come out into flower, and in the next month or so you can walk past them and not realise they have small creamy white flowers that come in the axils, just in the axils of the leaf. I would show you, but not being that good at, I would have to stitch together some of my filming, and I'm not quite sure how to do that yet. Otherwise I would have showed you the plants in the front garden, and then could have come in the back and showed you the rest of it. But what you get from sarcococca, if you go out and look, from last season, are these dark berries. Now these are the seeds, and as you can see from here, there's two different sorts of seeds here. The smallest of the seeds, that one there, is from the sarcococca, and these others that are here, those other four, are from Daphne. And Daphne and sarcococca will look, the berries will look exactly the same, similar size, and inside that pulp. And if you don't like getting your hands too dirty, what you can do is take a tissue, put the berries inside them, and then just squash them. Difficult. I should have got my wife out here, but it's too cold for her. So what I'm going to do is put the berry in there and squash it. Now, not all of them will have a seed in, but if we've done all right, you'll probably see inside the tissue is the pulp, and I've got a feeling, yep, there, if we can just clean it off, is the seed. So just one seed usually in a berry that size, and if you can wait till the berries get as big as they can be, you'll end up with a slightly bigger seed. Now the difference in colour, that berry will turn the same colour as that. These I've had, believe it or not, stored inside my jumper. Well, I say jumper, I've got a hoodie, and I collected them, cleaned them off. I put them in my pocket meaning to do something with them and forgot all about them. So this morning I went to my hoodie, which is in my van for work, and retrieved them out of my pocket, and they've turned this different colour. Now normally you could just sow these, but certain plants, and these are one of them, need what's called stratification, and that means that they won't germinate until they've had a period of cold. Now in my day, when I was a lot younger, what we used to do with them was put them in some moist sand in a pot just below the surface, just an inch or so underneath the surface, in a small pot. Then we'd put them in a plastic bag and leave them in the fridge for a month or so. This would work really well, and then after a month or so you can leave them in there for up to 3 months, and then in the spring we take them out and we bring them indoors, or bring them into a greenhouse or a propagator, and put them into compost. Take them out of the sand, put them into compost, and they would germinate. But nowadays, especially with the weather that we've got at the moment, you can just pot these up and then leave them outside. You can put them in a cold frame ideally if you've got one, so they don't get too wet, because what you need to do is stop them from getting too wet, otherwise they might rot off. But I've got some compost that's well draining here that I've used already for cuttings and things that didn't take. So what I'm going to do is put that in, just firm it down nicely, and we shall put these seeds in. I'm going to try and keep them separate. Whoops. I'm going to keep the Daphne seeds in this pot, and the 2 Sarcococca that's all you need to do. Put a small coating, just enough to cover the seed, over the top, and what I will do is give it a slight water, not a lot at this time of year, but just a slight water, and that should do it. And the same will apply to the Sarcococca seeds, and I shall put them out in the cold frame that I've got. Just got these 2 Sarcococca seeds which I'm going to sow. One of them is can't pick it up, one of them is very small, that one, but I mean, it's cost you virtually nothing apart from a little bit of compost. So if they come up next spring, because they're in this soil now ready, once they've had a period of cold and the weather starts to warm up, I'm hoping that they will just germinate. So that's quite good. The Sarcococca that I've just I snapped a bit off to show you what it looks like, Sarcococca. I'm going to turn this into a cutting, and I'm going to put that in it's not quite the right time of year, but in the greenhouse it might just root, or I might even put it in the propagator, because that'll give it a little bit of heat. Hardwood cuttings, which this will be classed as, don't really need heat as such, but I like experimenting. Textbooks tell you one thing, but the textbooks aren't always right, and it's not going to cost me anything or do any harm, so it's worth experimenting and trying. So these will now be watered, and I'll put them outside in the cold frame that I've got, my homemade cold frame, and they'll sit out there for the rest of the winter, and then hopefully in the spring they'll come up. There's other jobs that can be done at this time of the year, especially if you've taken lots of cuttings. These Cleanthus cuttings that I took are rooted now. As you can see, they're growing well. Well, 2 of them are. The other one I'm not too sure about in that pot. I think that it looks as though it might have a few roots on. I mean, it could be left longer, doesn't really matter. But if you've got jobs you want to do, you can start potting up things, especially this Melianthus major is in quite a small pot, so it wouldn't do any harm to pot that up ready for the spring, or you could leave it. It's really up to you. If you fancy pottering around in the greenhouse and doing various things, then that's good. Fuchsias, this I potted up in the autumn, so that won't need touching at all now. Just in the spring, before it's bedded out, I shall start feeding it once it starts into growth. Shouldn't really be in flower at this time of the year, but it shows you how through manipulation of a greenhouse and various things, stuff will keep growing. This is one of the salvias, and it's one that doesn't really survive very well, but it's normally grown as an annual. Has the blue and white spires of flowers on it. It's one of my favourites. You can probably see the flower just starting to come on it now. This I'm keeping in order to take cuttings off it in the early spring if it survives the winter. And we have had some very frosty nights, so just again, it's just fun. It's just experimenting. Gardening should be fun, should be something you really enjoy, and don't get worried if stuff doesn't take, or you know, you lose it. My wife bought this fern as a house plant, and we put it in, and twice it just seemed to die off, and it didn't like it in the house at all. And yet we bought 2 other ferns, different types of ferns, with it at the same time, and they're doing really well. But this particular one, the leaves started turning brown, but I don't know if you can really notice, but it's suddenly starting to pick up since I've brought it out and put it in the greenhouse. So it's just one of them things. In another week's time or so, as the new growth starts to come through, I shall take off all the dead leaves and cut those fronds back. They're not leaves, they're fronds, but I'll cut them back, and then the new growth that you can see starting to come from the middle will hopefully take off. So that's just a few other things that you can do in the winter. At the moment, you have to watch. One of the succulents here rotted off in the middle, but as you can also see, there's a new shoot coming from the base, so hopefully that'll survive the winter, and I might have to pull out the dead parent bit, but that won't matter. I've enjoyed doing cacti again. We used to have them when our children were really young, and they're so easy to grow. Yeah, the only thing you really need to be careful with is not to overwater them. This had another branch on it that looked really good, but it started to rot, and the hole grew bigger and bigger in the middle of it, and it ended up with 2/3 of the tissue just rotted and disappeared. And then it stopped rotting, but of course it didn't look very good, so I took that off. But this was a tiny little, probably almost as big as these mimulus that are there. And there's another one. These were £1.99, I think, from Long Acres or one of the garden centres. This was just one plant, and this particular succulent cacti, and I divided it up and put it in the pot, and it's thriving, especially if you keep them dry. Cacti and succulents need very little, if any, water during the winter, so keep them on the really dry side and they'll thrive. They'll do really well. The cuttings, especially, we've got more salvias. There's 3 different types of salvia here, and each one of these the cuttings have taken, and I'm going to leave them till around about February, March, and then as they'll spring into active growth, I'll divide them up, pop them up, and they'll be ready to go out. That's another Coprosmia lemon and lime, which I took cuttings, and they're doing really well. The red one, Pacific Sunset, that one's much more difficult to root. Cleanthus again is doing well. They're growing, new shoots coming on them, so they're taken from a new variety I got this year, which I told you about, which is doing reasonably all right. The red one that I've got, I've left outside, and I've given it to our local church, and it's doing really well, surviving the cold weather, which is amazing, because the temperature dropped to -4 outside the other day, but it's surviving. It's in the town centre, So it's normally about 1 degree warmer than we are out here on the edges of Guildford. We have the common at the back of us, so it does tend to get colder here. So that's it for now. Hope you're going to have a good year with the garden. Enjoy it, especially with the lockdown. Gardening's a great way to escape, and it gives you get in touch with nature. Being a Christian, it means an awful lot to me. But you know, even if you're not a Christian, then enjoying the garden is such a wonderful thing to do. So enjoy yourselves, and as soon as we get another project coming along, well, I have got another project going, which I might just show you actually. We've got time. I did show you that this conifer's surviving the weather really well, although it's not totally hardy. It seems to be doing quite well, and the fact that I've opened it up and there's plenty of air getting to it now, I'm going to enjoy experimenting it, making it into that puff ball or cloud balls, whichever you want to call it. Come the spring, I'll start shaping it, and we'll see how we get on with that. The salvias, by this time, this time last year, these were dead and right back to the ground, but even the 3-4 minus degrees we've had, they're still hanging in there, which is quite amazing. All the herbaceous, the Brunnera, the leaves are still there. They should have completely died back, but they're not doing. What I will do a bit later on is dig up some of these spray chrysanthemums, and those I'll put in the greenhouse, and hopefully I can take cuttings of and so increase the stock I've got. This is a red salvia, and this is a lot more hardier than the blue or purpley blue salvias. So that's doing well. You can see at the back there, that's a blue, purpley blue salvia, and that's been really hit by the frost. They are tender, much more tender than the red varieties. Things like hot lips survive really well. The project that I started, but I've had to abandon because the garden is absolutely waterlogged at the moment, is the pond. I put in a footing for the breeze blocks, but so they're not actually in yet, but they're just sat on there. It's the clayey mud underneath is dropping down onto the footing that I've put in. The pond was empty. This is just to show you the amount of rainfall that we've had. There's over a foot of water in there, well, 18 inches of water in that pond, and I've emptied it once as well, so it just goes to show the garden is my garden particularly. Clay is wonderful if you can work it. It's the best soil medium you could possibly have, but it does suffer from drainage. As you can see here, most of the week this was underwater. The water table's as high as it could possibly be, and along the borders it's just so wet. The birds have been enjoying the nuts and everything. The holly was in good berries, but the birds have now ate most of those. The roses are exceptional. They're all starting to shoot, which is not a good thing, because if we get a late frost or late frost, as those new growths come out, they will be severely damaged. So you have to be very careful there. But it has been, on the whole, especially in the south here, it's been very mild. You can see how cold it is in the garden. The bird bath's full of ice. Big chunk of ice there. They're not going to drink much of that. But the garden will soon pick up. The only thing I want to do at the moment is this is the salvia hot lips. Again, you see it does survive much better than other salvias. Plenty of buds coming on the wisteria, so that looks as though you can usually tell with wisteria if you get plump thick buds, then those are flower buds. If they're very thin and like some of those small ones at the bottom there, if they're flat and that, then they're not going to flower. But it's done well. It's only a few years old and it's done quite well. I can't wait for the weather to pick up, but we're going to have to wait another month or two before we can do anything like that. The stuff that's tender, really tender, I've put away. Just a bit of cover. You can buy fleece if not, but this is one of the cleanthus from cuttings that I took, and that's just got the protection of the fence, and that's it. But it's doing really well, considering it's not meant to be totally hardy, it's semi-hardy. It's doing quite well. Some of the things I've put under this corrugated cover is not so much for the frost protection. This palm is under here really to keep it dry. I don't want it to get too wet. Something I showed you earlier in the summer, I bought this from the garden centre as a reject. It was sold off at about a third of the price, and it's pulled round now. It's a variegated skimmia. It's about to come into flower and it's doing really well. So it just shows you these things you buy, some do well, some don't. This grevillea, I've lost half the flowers on it. They turned brown and started to rot off, but the others are coming, and so early spring this grevillea is going to look really lovely. Something that I'm amazed at is just a little bit of frost protection. This is Alstroemeria and it's in flower, and yes, it is coming up to the middle of January. This, I could take these off and take them indoors, and they'd make really good cut flowers. We've already taken in about a month ago. We took quite a few in that we pulled off, but just that little bit of frost protection, and they're still growing in January outdoors. It's remarkable. There's other things in here. Something that a friend of mine who from church is a carpenter, and he does lots of stuff, and I asked him if he did sawdust, and he's got all this sawdust, and I asked him to give me the bags. Really good stuff. If you've got dahlia tubers you've lifted, you can put them in a box and cover them in wood chip, and that will stop the frost from getting them. Then you can leave them in an unheated garage, or put them in the greenhouse if your greenhouse isn't heated. And if you get 2 or 3 inches of that round, or put them in a cardboard box is even better. Put your dahlia tubers in a cardboard box and then just cover them in the wood chip or sawdust or whatever you can get hold of. People are giving this stuff away, so you don't need anything fancy, and they will last perfectly well over the winter, and then come the spring, early spring, you can get them out